and I'm taking Ethics in the Professions online, and this is my case study presentation. I am focusing on drug companies and their marketing techniques with gifts. The article is by Scott Turner, and here we go. Ethics challenge humans nearly every day. Situations arise, and often we must question if choosing to do something is right or if it's wrong. Often we must also question if we ought or ought not to do something. The beautiful thing about ethics is that every individual can form their very own opinions. What I may think is acceptable and ethical, you may not, and that is okay. Things tend to get obscured a little bit when we bring the legality of situations into play. A great example of an ethical dilemma is that of pharmaceutical companies giving gifts and kickbacks to physicians for prescribing their medications. At a quick glance, you might think, there's nothing wrong with that. But if the gifts of the industry are driving up the cost of edge-of-the-century medications out of the reach of most Americans' pocketbooks, then there's probably something wrong with that. The ethical dilemma comes into play when we consider the goal of any physician, and that is to provide affordable health care to the patients. By accepting gifts from pharmaceutical companies, physicians are driving the cost of medications up, and the patient is the one whom suffers in the end. Here are some facts about pharmaceutical companies. Kickbacks and gifts from pharmaceutical companies began as far back as the 1960s and immediately began to pose a question of ethical dilemma. Gifts in the 1960s ranged from ink pens to paper lunches, being brought into the doctor's office, and by the late 1990s, it was apparent that pharmaceutical companies had put marketing into high gear and drug representative jobs were at an all-time high. This is around the time when cutting-edge technology of cardiac catheterization began to spread across America. Even manufacturers of the stents began sending out representatives to endorse their medications. In 2002, the Association of American Medical College issued guidelines that gifts should be under $100, lunches should be modest, wonder who decides that, and the ultimate goal of any marketing should be to benefit the patient and their outcomes. Prior to this guideline, it was not unheard of to have drug companies cater to physicians who prescribe their medications or use their products. Often companies would provide expense-paid weekends or tropical retreats so that physicians could lay on the beach and learn about their medications that they are prescribing. Lunches would be extravagant and expensive. Government involvement in this ethical issue has been limited. When the American Associations of College issued guidelines in 2002, the government responded by claiming the new guidelines were substantial. To better help put this into perspective, let's take a look at some of the major pharmaceutical companies. Let's look at Effient and Plavix. This here is a pen from Effient, and this here is a pen from Plavix. I don't work at a doctor's office, I work in an intensive care unit, yet these pens always seem to show up everywhere. Both of these medications are required to keep that cardiac stent from occluding and having another massive heart attack. Even missing 1 or 2 doses can be fatal for the patient. The cost of Effient for a 1-month supply with no insurance is $400. The cost of Plavix for 1 month without insurance is around $250. These prices seem to bring up some ethical considerations. Is it ethical to charge so much money for a medication that is required for someone to live? Is it ethical that these companies are spending thousands of dollars on drug representative salaries, lunches, and marketing, while patients are left with the huge cost of medications? Patients are left with choosing between life and death, get their prescription filled or not. Is it ethical for physicians to accept gifts from representatives when they know ultimately in doing so, they are inflating the cost of medication itself? Business ethics to some is separate from their personal life. Take, for example, the game model by Albert Carr. He believes that business and ethics are 2 separate entities. Carr states, "And no one think any worse of the game of business because its standards of right and wrong differ from the prevailing traditions of morality in our society." Carr's model of business would lead one to believe that it is okay to accept gifts and to play the game of business. Why not accept the free gifts from pharmaceutical companies? If you don't, then someone else just will. In light of Carr's view, let's take a look at Norman Gillespie's model. His view is that you ought not mislead. He takes more of an altruistic view to business, whereas Carr looks at business as an egoist. Gillespie claims, ordinary duty may cease to be duty when the cost of the individual of fulfilling that duty is too high. This claim makes me think of the patient. Is it acceptable to take part in driving the cost of medications up by accepting gifts? Can physicians' offices not afford their lunches, their ink pens, their paper pads? It's just silly. I think often physicians look at business in light of Robert Solomon's view. According to Solomon, business is a social activity, specifically the activity of exchanging money, goods, and services. Are physicians just being social and exchanging knowledge about medications from the representatives for an ink pen or a sandwich? Solomon makes a great ethical point. When we consider the first virtue of business, honesty, is it ethically acceptable for physicians to appear to be on board with expensive medications and accept their gifts, but never actually prescribe them? When we take a look at professional-client relationships, we need to consider trust. As a physician, a patient puts their trust into their expertise. According to Michael Bayless, the fiduciary model is, the weaker party depends on the stronger party in ways, and the other does not, so the trust must be stronger in the stronger party. The fiduciary model resembles most of physician and patient professional-client relationships. Is it acceptable for physicians to distrust their patients and prescribe such expensive medications? Patients put their lives in the hands of their physicians on a daily basis. Prescribing and taking part in driving up the cost of expensive medications is only harming the patient. Pharmaceutical representatives do offer their knowledge when they are peddling their medications. Who decides what is greater? Physicians are expanding their knowledge on new prescribing medications when they take part in marketing business with pharmaceutical reps. Is that knowledge worth more than a patient being able to afford their medications? The pharmaceutical companies are using cutting-edge technology to attempt to find cures for diseases and improve patient health. Without these pharmaceutical representatives, how would physicians possibly learn about these life-saving medications? Finally, let's take a look at government involvement and regulations. According to Norman Bowie, government regulation of corporate ethics is viewed on a scale from distrust to horror, and government regulation is opposed. Is it acceptable that medications associations and the government set up regulations for business and pharmaceutical companies? Is it okay to call the kettle black? Lots of government officials take part in lobbyist activities. It seems as though physicians are just doing the same. My resolution, let's place a limit on the amount of marketing that pharmaceutical companies can partake in a good start to decrease in the expense of medications. Spreading knowledge about medication is costly, but with all of the internet and technology available, maybe the physicians should do research on their own instead of participating in marketing of medications. Guidelines set forth by the American Association of Colleges seems to think that there is a happy medium for all parties involved currently. Physicians just need to do their part to ensure that they are not accepting marketing gifts outside of the guidelines set forth. Patients should also take a front seat and be knowledgeable to their healthcare and their prescriptions. Ethical dilemmas exist in business everywhere. The right to choose what one thinks is ethical or what is not is entirely up to the individual. When the individual of ethics begins to affect our lives, we must often question morality and the driving forces behind it. Participating in marketing from pharmaceutical companies may seem harmless at a glance, but when we consider all of the ethical dilemmas of participating, one must question if it is ethically acceptable. One must also decide if they take a Gillespie or a Carr standpoint in business ethics. As mentioned earlier, the beauty of ethics is that we can all form our very own opinions. Thank you.